It was a day of stifling heat, the kind that turns the air into a weight that's hard to carry. Mrs. Marta, a lady with weathered skin and eyes that seemed to carry old stories, walked slowly among piles of rubble and garbage. Her job as a recycler took her to the dump every morning, a fate she accepted with resignation and even a certain dignity. "It's honest work," she used to say to herself as she sorted cans and plastic bottles. That day, however, something seemed different. She felt a restlessness in her chest, but continued with her routine. Suddenly, her eyes were drawn to a different glow, something that was unusual in the midst of the rubble. As she got closer, she saw that it was a backpack. Not just any backpack. That object stood out. Fine leather, gold details, something that should never have been there. Mrs. Marta frowned, puzzled. "But what is this?" she muttered, straightening her worn glasses and bending down to pick up the bag. She held it carefully, as if it were something fragile, and hesitated for a moment. She had the instinct to leave it there. After all, she knew that things lost or thrown away were not her responsibility. But curiosity won out. She slowly unzipped the main zipper, and what she saw left her speechless. There, inside the rucksack, were piles of money notes, organized and held together by rubber bands, and some jewelry that looked very expensive, glinting in the sunlight. Next to it was a small, shabby stuffed animal, a little white rabbit with dangling ears and an almost faded smile. "My heavens, but this is worth a fortune," she exclaimed, looking around as if she was waiting for someone to come and explain the situation. Mrs. Marta felt her heart racing. She knew that this amount of money and these objects could change her life and that of her family. The temptation was real, palpable. Here was an opportunity she had never had in her entire life. She could pay off her debts, buy a decent house, live without the constant anxiety of tomorrow. But in the midst of her excitement, a thought crossed her mind. But does this money have an owner? And if it does, how did it end up here? She thought out loud as she held the stuffed bunny in her hands. It seemed to have a story, something that someone should miss. It was at that moment that the memory of his grandmother came to mind. She used to say, "Marta, whatever isn't yours, leave it where it is. God sees everything, my dear." She felt as if her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, soft but firm. And then, as if she were talking to herself, she said, "This doesn't belong to me. I don't know who lost it, but someone must need these things, the money, the bunny." She sighed deeply, still holding the toy, and looked at the piles of rubble around her. It was as if the dump was silent, respecting the decision she was about to make. Carefully, she put the items back into her backpack, zipped it up and slung it over her shoulder, feeling the weight not only of the object, but also of the choice she had just made. "What are you going to do, Mrs. Marta?" she asked herself, as she took one last look at the garbage around her, as if waiting for the place to give her an answer. "I'm going to find out who lost it. Someone must be desperate." And so, with firm steps and a determined look, Marta left the dump. Mrs. Marta walked through the streets with her backpack firmly on her shoulder, her heart still racing. With every step, she felt the weight of the decision she had made. She could have gone home, kept the money and sold the jewelry, but something inside her told her that the right thing to do was to try to return everything to its owner. And although this choice filled her heart with pride, doubt haunted her, whispering in her thoughts. "Did I do the right thing?" she murmured, settling her backpack on her shoulder, as if, somehow, the physical weight could balance out the conflict inside her. With this money, I could solve so many things. But at the same time, she knew that the peace of mind she felt from being honest was priceless. She passed a newsstand and saw headlines about crime and theft, about the misery that plagued the city, and this reminded her even more of why she had decided to do what was right. "I don't want to get mixed up in these things. My grandmother was right. Honesty is a wealth that no one can take away from you." As she walked along, a young man passed her and glanced quickly at her backpack, as if something had caught his eye. She immediately gripped the strap tighter and continued. She knew that, in that neighborhood, an object like that could attract the kind of attention she didn't need. Suddenly, she stopped when she saw her reflection in a store window. She looked closely at herself, a little surprised by the image she saw. A humble lady in worn-out clothes, carrying a luxury backpack. She laughed nervously, a little awkwardly. "What'll people think? An old recycler with a bag like that? They'll think I'm up to no good." She continued walking, trying not to attract attention, but the doubts came back to haunt her. After all, was it really necessary to go through all this? She could simply leave the bag somewhere, hand it over to the authorities, or even give it back to God, as her grandmother would say. But at the same time, she felt a greater responsibility, a silent calling that said this was something only she could do. Perhaps it was a chance for something more, to show that people like her, invisible in the eyes of society, also had value and character. As she reflected, her thoughts were interrupted by a small boy who ran up to her. "Hi, ma'am," said the boy, with a curious smile, looking at her backpack. She bent down, a little surprised by the boy's spontaneity. "Hi, my son. Why are you looking like that? What have you got there?" "It looks like a fancy backpack. Is it yours?" asked the boy, curious and full of an innocence that made Mars smile. "Well, it's mine for now, but I'm looking for the real owner. Maybe he's out there looking too," explained Marta, stroking the boy's head. The boy looked at her with big eyes and after a brief pause said, "My mother says that good people always get what's theirs back. If you try to help, it'll all work out." The boy's words touched Marta's heart, giving her the extra motivation she needed. She thanked the boy and continued her walk, now with a sense of relief mixed with renewed determination. She knew that, despite all the risk and doubts, she was doing the right thing. However, as she continued, she didn't notice two men watching from afar. They followed her discreetly, exchanging glances and whispering among themselves. Marta was still absorbed in her thoughts, so focused on her mission to return the backpack that she didn't notice the approaching danger. It was only when she felt a firm hand on her shoulder that she realized something was wrong. "Hey, Grandma, what's with the backpack?" said one of the men, with a debauched smile. Marta turned around, her heart racing. "It belongs to someone who lost it. I'm trying to find the owner." The man let out a cynical laugh. "Is that so? And how much is in there, huh? It should be enough to share with us." Marta took a step back, clutching the strap of her backpack tightly. "I've got nothing for you boys. This backpack isn't mine or yours. It belongs to someone who is waiting for it." The second man stepped forward with a menacing expression. "Let's do this the easy way, lady. Give us the bag and nobody gets hurt." She began to feel panic setting in, but she didn't want to let go of the backpack. I'm not giving anything away. Please leave me alone." Just as she was about to give in to the pressure, she heard a firm, authoritative voice behind them. "Leave the lady alone." The voice made the men stop and turn around. It was a tall, serious-looking man, wearing ordinary clothes, but with a look that conveyed security. He was a plainclothes policeman who happened to be passing by and noticed the situation. "Who are you?" asked one of the bandits, with a defiant tone. The policeman discreetly pulled a badge out of his pocket and showed it to them. "I'm someone who's going to take you to the police station if you don't get away from her now." The men exchanged nervous glances and, realizing that the situation was not favorable, took a few steps back before running off down the street, disappearing around a corner. Marta, relieved, took a deep breath and looked at the policeman gratefully. "Thank you so much, sir. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't shown up." He smiled gently. "Don't worry, ma'am. Everything's fine now. And, out of curiosity, what's so important about that bag?" Marta hesitated for a moment, but felt she could trust the man. "It's a long story. I found this bag in a dump, full of money and other valuables. I thought the right thing to do was to find the owner and return everything." The policeman looked at her with admiration. "You really are a person of character. Few people would have done the same in your situation." She gave a shy smile. "My grandmother always said that honesty is what defines a person. I couldn't live in peace if I kept something that didn't belong to me." The policeman nodded, visibly touched. "I see. Look, if you don't mind, I can help you find the owner. Together, it might be easier to trace someone who has lost something so valuable." Marta, relieved, accepted the help. It would be a blessing. On my own, I don't know if I could do it. And so, with the policeman's unexpected protection and help, Mrs. Marta felt she was on the right track. She didn't know what she would find at the end of this journey, but she was sure that alongside this man who also believed in justice, she would be able to fulfill the mission that fate had in store for her. The policeman, who introduced himself as Mike, was walking alongside Mrs. Marta, listening attentively to her story about the backpack and why she wanted to return it to its owner. He watched her with admiration and, at the same time, curiosity. Few people would have done the same in her situation, especially someone who lived in such humble conditions. As they walked, Marta took her backpack off her shoulder and opened it carefully. "There's something in here that might help us find the owner," she said, rummaging through the objects. "Look at this, a note from a fancy restaurant. It looks like he's been there recently." Mike took the note and read it aloud. "Brentwood Grill. It's one of the hottest restaurants in town." He handed the note back to Marta and thought for a moment. If he really lost his backpack there, someone must have seen something. These kinds of places have security cameras, security guards. Maybe we'll find a clue. Marta looked at the note with squinted eyes, trying to decipher something else there. "I'm not from that world, you know? I can't imagine going into a place like this." She sighed a little sheepishly. "But if it's the way to return it, I'll go." The policeman smiled and nodded. "Don't worry, Mrs. Marta. I'll go with you. And if anyone says anything, I'll be there to explain the situation." The two continued walking until they reached the restaurant's address. When they stopped in front of the elegant building, Marta hesitated. The place was surrounded by impeccable glass windows, with a sophisticated facade and an atmosphere that seemed unattainable. She looked down at her own clothes, which clearly stood out from the clientele that usually frequented a place like this. "Are you sure we can go in?" she asked a little apprehensively. Mike smiled and put his hand on her shoulder. "You're with me. We're just going to go in, ask a few questions, and see what we can find out. If they frown, let me handle it." As she entered, Marta noticed that the eyes of the waiters and customers were on her. The elegance of the place and the atmosphere full of crystal and fine china made her feel even more out of place. But she held her head high, remembering the purpose of being there. A formal-looking manager approached with a polite but visibly puzzled smile. "Good afternoon. Can I help you with anything?" He glanced briefly at Marta and then turned his attention to Mike, probably identifying in him someone with more authority. Mike flashed his police badge. "Yes, sir. My name is Mike, and this is Ms. Marta. We're investigating a lost backpack that we believe was left here. Could we talk about it? Perhaps Ms. Marta has found something that belongs to one of your customers." The manager gestured for them to follow him to a more private area, away from the other customers. When they arrived, he invited them to sit down in comfortable armchairs. Sure. I can search the camera records if that helps. I just need you to explain a bit more about what happened." Marta, who was holding her backpack on her lap, began to explain. "I work as a recycler, you know, and I found this bag in the dump. When I opened it, I found money, some jewelry, and even a stuffed animal." She looked at Mike before continuing, as if seeking approval. "And then I felt I had to find the owner. Someone must be desperate, and I wouldn't be able to sleep peacefully knowing that it doesn't belong to me." The manager seemed impressed by her sincerity and nodded slowly. "Yes. And you mentioned a note from the restaurant? Can I take a look?" She took the ticket out of her bag and handed it to the manager, who looked at it. "This note is from a dinner that took place last night. And indeed, there was a situation. A customer reported a similar backpack missing. It was a busy night, and he mentioned something about a disturbance on the way out. Now that you're telling me, it's starting to make sense." Mike raised his eyebrows, interested. "And you have security cameras, right? Could we have a look to see if we can get any more information about how the bag disappeared?" The manager nodded and stood up. "I'm going to get the recordings from last night. I'll be back in a few minutes." He walked away, leaving them alone for a few moments. While they waited, Marta looked at Mike and sighed. "I never thought such a simple decision would bring me here. It's like life is showing me a different path, like it's testing me." Mike smiled. "You've done something that very few people would do. That kind of honesty is rare. And I believe that sometimes the universe rewards those who take the path of kindness, even when it's the hardest." Shortly afterwards, the manager returned, holding a tablet with the images from the cameras. He sat down next to them and began to play back the recording, explaining what he had captured. "Look, this is the moment the customer arrives at the restaurant. He's carrying his backpack. Everything seems normal. But then, during a commotion that happened near the entrance, look here." He pointed at the screen. Two men enter the image, and in the midst of the confusion, one of them grabs the backpack while the other distracts the customer. Marta and Mike watched attentively as the images showed the scene unfolding. The two men quickly leave, backpack in hand. Later, on another camera, they're seen walking away from the restaurant and toward the side street. "And what happened after that?" asked Mike, trying to piece together what they had discovered so far. The manager moved the recording forward a little. Here, they realize they're being followed by one of the restaurant's security guards. In a panic, the two run into an alley where a garbage container was positioned. When they realize that the security guard is about to catch up with them, They throw their backpacks into the container and take off running. Marta covered her mouth in surprise. So that's how that backpack ended up in the dump. They threw it away so they wouldn't get caught. The manager nodded in agreement. That's right. It looks like they intended to go back and retrieve it. But apparently the container was picked up before that. Mike looked at Marta, and she realized that they were getting closer to solving the mystery. Did you see? Your honesty brought a story to light that was destined to be solved. Without your action, no one would ever know what really happened. The manager also smiled, now with a look of respect. Ms. Marta, your attitude is inspiring, and I can assure you that the owner of the bag will be extremely grateful for your honesty and effort in returning something so valuable. She sighed, feeling a deep sense of relief mixed with pride. I only did what my heart told me to. Now, I hope we can find the owner and that he gets everything back. Mike put his hand on her shoulder, reassuringly. You did more than that. You brought a story back to life, and with that, you've created the possibility of something much greater. With this certainty in her heart, Mrs. Marta prepared for the next step. As Marta and Mike left the restaurant, she was still feeling the impact of what they had discovered. Knowing that the backpack had been thrown away on purpose to prevent the thieves from being caught perplexed her. The idea that someone could discard something so valuable so easily was hard for her to understand. It's strange to think that something that could change a person's life was thrown away like that, as if it had no value, commented Marta with a faraway look in her eyes. Mike nodded, watching her. Sometimes people do things that seem unthinkable to us. They may have other priorities, or they simply don't value it as much as you would. As they walked, Marta found herself lost in thought until something snapped her out of it. She felt a gaze on her, something uncomfortable. Turning her head, she noticed two men who had passed them minutes before. Now they were standing a few meters away, leaning against a lamppost, watching her suspiciously. She instinctively tightened the strap of her backpack, feeling her heart race. Mike, she muttered, nudging the policeman discreetly. Those men, I think they're following us. Mike looked over his shoulder, noticing the same men and quickly understanding the situation. Let's turn the next corner and see if they're still after us, he whispered, guiding her down the street calmly, trying not to attract attention. As they turned the corner, they hurried. Marta looked back quickly and saw that the two men had also turned the corner, now closer than before. They're really coming, she said, her voice filled with tension. Calm down, Mrs. Marta, replied Mike, keeping his tone calm. I know what to do. Just follow me and stay calm. They continued walking quickly until the men caught up with them and approached with threatening expressions. One of them, tall and with a scar on his face, stepped forward and stared at Marta. "Old woman, why are you carrying that backpack, huh? That doesn't belong to you," he said in a harsh tone. Marta tried to back away, but the other man blocked her, crossing his arms and letting out a debauched smile. "We know what's in there, ma'am. Tell you what, hand us that backpack right away and nobody gets hurt." Mike stood between Marta and the men with a firm stance. "Turn around and leave the lady alone." Now, the man with the scar laughed, clearly not realizing that Mike was a policeman. "And who are you to tell us what to do? Huh? Do you want to play the hero?" Without saying another word, Mike discreetly pulled out his badge and showed it to them. "I'm a policeman, and you've just got yourselves in a bigger trouble than you thought." The men looked at each other, a little confused, but soon the expression of debauchery turned into a mixture of dread and anger. "We'd better go," muttered the second man, pulling the other by the arm. With a look of resentment, the two men began to back away and soon disappeared into the crowd. Marta breathed a sigh of relief, but her heart was still pounding. "Thank you, Mike. I don't know what I would have done without you around," she said, her eyes a little watery. He smiled, trying to reassure her. "You're safe now, but we need to be careful. They might try again, or there might be others who want the same thing." Marta nodded, feeling the weight of the backpack even more intensely now. "I never imagined that just trying to do the right thing would put me in so much danger. Unfortunately, when something valuable is involved, there's always risk. But we're in this together, and I'm not going to let anything bad happen to you," said Mike, determined. "Let's get on with it. Now we know who the owner is, and we have a clear path to him. Just a little more patience." Marta took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "Let's go then. I want to sort this out soon, before more of these profiteers show up." The two of them continued walking towards the millionaire's address, now even more alert. Marta was tense, but at the same time determined. She knew that, despite the dangers, she was doing something important, something that defined who she was. And that gave her the strength to keep going, regardless of the difficulties. Arriving in the neighborhood where the millionaire lived, they noticed that it was a much safer and well-kept place. The houses were large and well-built, with impeccable gardens and luxurious cars in the garages. Marta felt a little out of place in this setting, but she kept going with Mike by her side. "This is it," he said, pointing to a mansion with high gates and a visibly sophisticated security system. She looked up at the imposing entrance and swallowed. "I never thought I'd set foot in a place like this. It's all so different." Mike smiled, trying to put her at ease. "You deserve to be here as much as anyone. After all, you're the most honest person I know." They approached the intercom and Mike pressed a button. After a few moments, a professional voice answered. "Yes, my name is Mike. I'm a policeman, and I'm here with Mrs. Marta. We have something belonging to Mr. Edward Carlton," said Mike, straight to the point. The person on the other end hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hold on a second." After a few seconds of waiting, the gates slowly opened, revealing a long driveway lined with trees. Marta felt her heart pounding. Soon she would be face to face with the owner of the backpack. She didn't know what to expect, but she hoped that he would appreciate the gesture she was about to make. When they reached the front door, an elegant, well-dressed man, who must have been in his 50s, was waiting with a curious expression. He looked at Marta and the backpack she was holding so carefully. "You brought?" he began, visibly moved at the sight of the object Marta was carrying. Marta stepped forward and held out the backpack to him. "Yes, sir. I found this at the dump where I work. It was full of valuables and I felt I needed to give it back. I thought you might be looking for it." The man took the bag gently, as if it were something of extreme value. He unzipped it and, seeing the contents intact, sighed, visibly relieved. But it was when he found the little stuffed bunny that his eyes welled up with emotion. "This bunny was my son's. He lost it in a mess at the restaurant and has been inconsolable ever since. For him, this little animal is worth more than everything here," the man explained, his voice breaking. Marta smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "I knew it had a special value. Sometimes it's the simplest things that mean the most." The man nodded and looked at her with genuine gratitude. "You're a rare person, Mrs. Marta Rodriguez," she replied humbly. "Well, Ms. Marta, I can't thank you enough. Your honesty and kindness are something I could never have expected. Please accept the invitation to come in. I have something special I'd like to discuss with you." Marta exchanged a glance with Mike, who smiled and encouraged her. She knew that this moment could change her life in an unexpected way, but she was ready for whatever came, with a calm heart and a clear conscience. As she crossed the imposing entrance to the mansion, Marta felt like a character from a tale she had never imagined living. The polished marble floor reflected the soft lights of the chandeliers, and the walls were adorned with paintings that looked like works of art. It was all so different from the reality she knew, and she almost hesitated, but Mr. Carlton's gentle voice brought her back to the moment. "Please, Mrs. Marta, make yourself at home," he said, with a warm smile, as he gestured for her to sit down in a comfortable armchair near the fireplace. "I know it must all be a bit overwhelming." She smiled, trying to hide her slight discomfort. "It's all very beautiful here, Mr. Carlton. I never imagined I'd walk into a place like this," she confessed, looking around with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Carlton looked at her with respect and tenderness. "Marta, let me tell you something. Beauty is not in the things we possess, but in the actions we take. And what you've done is something uniquely beautiful." Marta lowered her eyes, a little shyly, but with a sincere smile. "I only did what I thought was right. That money, those jewels, and the bunny, all that isn't mine, and I wouldn't have any peace knowing that someone was suffering from losing it." Carlton nodded, clearly moved. "Not everyone would do the same, Mrs. Marta. Nowadays, honesty seems rare, but you have shown that there are still good people. My family and I are deeply grateful." He signaled to an employee who appeared with a tray of tea and some cookies. Marta accepted a cup, feeling the warmth in her hands as a comfort. The drink was warm and smooth, something she hadn't tasted for a while. "I'd like to tell you a little about the bunny you found," Carlton continued, holding the stuffed animal with a wistful look on his face. "This bunny belongs to my son, Tom. He's only 6 years old, and he's a special child. This toy is his world. Marta nodded, listening carefully. I knew there was something special about this bunny. He seemed important. Carlton sighed and gave a sad smile. Tom is autistic and has difficulty communicating with people. This bunny is his friend, the comfort he finds when the world seems confusing and scary. When he realized he had lost it, he panicked. It was a very difficult night. She felt a wave of understanding and empathy for the boy. Oh, the poor guy. I can only imagine how much he must have suffered. I just followed my heart, Mr. Carlton, and it seems to have guided me to do the right thing. Carlton smiled, touched. The lady's heart is more valuable than anything in this house. He paused, watching her for a moment, as if he had something more to say, but hesitated. Finally, taking courage, she continued. Actually, Marta, I'd like to make a proposal to you. She frowned in surprise. Proposal? What do you mean? Carlton placed the bunny on the table and leaned forward with a sincere look on his face. As well as getting the bunny back, you've brought peace to my family, and I would like you to consider being part of our lives in a special way. Part of your life? Marta looked confused, trying to understand what he meant. Yes, I see that you are someone of rare values, someone I can trust completely. I'd like to offer you a job opportunity. We need someone who has the patience and kindness to help look after Tom, someone who can be by his side, offer a little attention and comfort. Marta was silent for a few seconds, processing the unexpected offer. She had never imagined that a simple act of honesty could lead her to a job offer in a mansion like that. Mr. Carlton, this is very unexpected, she murmured, a little moved. But what about my life? I work at the dump. I have my humble home, my routine. Carlton nodded, understanding. I know it's a big change, Mrs. Marta, but I want to offer you something that I believe you deserve. As well as a job, I'd like to give you a house in a safe place where you can live with dignity. Something comfortable, near here, where you can start a new phase. She looked at him, surprised and moved. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined that someone would offer her such an opportunity. I don't know what to say, Mr. Carlton. I feel like I'm in a dream. He smiled, holding her hand gently. Mrs. Marta, this isn't a dream. It's just a gesture of thanks for your honesty, for your integrity. You have shown that what is true and pure still exists in this world. She looked at his hand in hers, and a feeling of peace and gratitude came over her. She knew that this decision would change her life forever. And in her heart, she felt that what was being offered was more than a gift. It was a new beginning. Mr. Carlton, I accept, she said, with tears of emotion in her eyes. I agree to work with Tom and be a part of your lives. And I promise to look after him as I would a child of my own. Carlton smiled, clearly relieved and happy with the answer. Then welcome, Mrs. Marta. I know you'll bring light to this house. As the moment unfolded, Mike, who had been watching in silence, smiled with satisfaction. He knew that Mrs. Marta deserved all that and more. Stepping closer, he said with a touch of pride, Mrs. Marta, I knew your honesty would bring something great. The world needs more people like you. She smiled at Mike, gratitude in her eyes. Thank you, Mike. If it hadn't been for you, I might not have made it this far. As she left the mansion, Marta felt her heart warm. She knew that this was just the beginning of a new phase in her life, a phase she could never have imagined. And as she looked up at the sky, she silently gave thanks. He was grateful for the courage to do what was right, for the goodness that guided his steps, and for all the people that fate had put in his path to make that moment a reality. Now, with a new home, a job, and a family that had taken her in, she felt that the future was an open field, full of possibilities. And, most importantly, she knew that all this had been achieved not because of material wealth, but because of the value of her soul and the strength of her character. Over the next few days, Marta began her new routine at Mr. Carlton's house. Life at the mansion was completely different from what she was used to, but she adapted little by little, delighted with every detail and grateful for the opportunity. The space Carlton had prepared for her was simple and welcoming, reflecting the respect and gratitude he felt for her honesty. However, her biggest mission in that house was something else, to get to know and win the trust of little Tom. On her first morning in Tom's room, she found him sitting in a corner, hugging his stuffed bunny. He watched her with a suspicious look, typical of a child who isn't used to new people. Marta, with her natural calm, approached him slowly, keeping a distance so as not to invade his space. Hi, Tom, she said softly, trying not to startle him. I'm Marta. You know, I'm the one who found your bunny. Tom looked at the toy, holding it even tighter, but said nothing. Marta smiled, realizing that it would be a slow process. He seemed so fragile, and at the same time so attached to the bunny that she felt an immediate affection for the child. I like rabbits too, you know, continued Marta, trying to open up a space for him to interact. When I was little, there was a bunny in the yard. He was cute, just like yours. Tom blinked, as if processing what she had said, but still didn't answer. Marta knew she couldn't force the interaction. She just sat next to him in silence, respecting his time. After a few minutes, she stood up gently. Well, I'll be around. If you need anything, you can call me, okay, Tom? She left the room, and as she closed the door, she felt a mixture of hope and patience. She knew that every child has their own time and that the most important thing was to offer them security and affection. Over the next few days, Marta tried small interactions with Tom. Sometimes she would tell him stories while he listened from afar. At other times, she just sat there, drawing or reading, so that he could see that she was there without pressure. And little by little, she noticed that Tom was getting closer, even if only a few steps at a time. One sunny afternoon, while Marta was in the kitchen preparing a snack, she felt a small presence next to her. When she turned around, she saw Tom holding the bunny and looking at her curiously. "What are you doing?" he asked quietly. Marta smiled, trying to contain her joy at seeing him finally open up. "I'm making chocolate cookies. Do you like cookies?" Tom nodded, still looking suspicious, but interested. Marta saw an opportunity and picked up a smaller apron, handing it to him gently. "Would you like to help me make the cookies?" she asked, watching him with a warm gaze. Tom looked at the apron hesitantly, but finally took it and put it on. Marta smiled and began to explain each step of the recipe, letting him stir the dough and form the cookie balls with his small, careful hands. At one point, she noticed a shy smile appearing on his face. "Did you know that when I was little, my grandmother used to make cookies like this with me?" commented Marta as she stirred the dough. "She always told me that the secret to a good cookie is to put a little love into the recipe." Tom laughed a little suspiciously. "Love isn't an ingredient." Marta smiled and winked at him. But that depends. When you make something with love, it seems to taste better, don't you think?" He shrugged, but for a moment seemed to consider the possibility. When they had finished preparing the cookies, they put the baking sheet in the oven, and Marta noticed that Tom was more relaxed next to her. While they waited, Marta sat down next to him in the kitchen and began to tell him stories about her childhood. How she used to help her grandmother with the chores, how her simple life was full of little moments of joy. Tom, without her expecting it, started asking questions. "Did you have a real bunny?" he asked, curious. Marta nodded. "Yes, I did. His name was Peepo. He was white, like your bunny, and loved to run around the yard. I used to play with him for hours." Tom smiled, holding his bunny tighter. "My bunny's name is Max. He's my best friend." Marta's heart warmed at the revelation. She knew that at that moment, Tom was confiding in her, sharing something important. "He must be a very good friend, Tom. Friends like that are precious." The cookies were ready and the smell of chocolate spread through the kitchen. Marta took the baking sheet out of the oven and put some cookies on a plate. "Should we have a taste? I think the love we put into the recipe will make them delicious." Tom took a cookie, took a bite, and smiled, satisfied. "It's very good." Marta smiled back. "You know, Tom, I think we made a good team. How about we do other things together from time to time?" He looked at her thoughtfully and finally nodded. "Okay." At that moment, Marta realized that she was building a bridge between them, a connection that wasn't just based on words, but on gestures, glances, and small shared moments. She knew that the journey with Tom wouldn't be easy, but every step forward was an achievement that she cherished deeply. Later, while Tom was running to show his father the cookies, Mr. Carlton approached Marta, who was cleaning the kitchen. He observed the scene and smiled, visibly moved. "I see Tom is getting more and more comfortable with you," he said, with a grateful look on his face. "I can't thank you enough for what you're doing for him." Marta smiled back, wiping her hands on a cloth. Mr. Carlton, Tom is a special child. He just needs time and affection. I'm just trying to be someone he can trust." Carlton nodded, reflecting on her words. "You know, Marta, what you're doing goes far beyond a job. Tom has suffered enough from the absence of people who really care. And you brought something that none of us could." Marta, humble as ever, shook her head. "I'm only here to help, Mr. Carlton. Sometimes that's all a child needs. someone to be there for them, someone to listen. Tom's father sighed, clearly moved. You brought more than help, Marta. You brought hope to my son. And to me too. That moment reaffirmed Marta's purpose in that house. She understood that her presence was more than a simple act of kindness. It was a gift she could offer, proof that affection and patience could heal deep wounds. And as she watched Tom running around the house, holding his bunny and laughing spontaneously, Marta felt that every sacrifice, every honest decision, every moment of patience had been rewarded. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, with the mission of bringing love and security to a child who needed it. In the weeks that followed, Marta's presence brought about a remarkable change in Tom's life and that of the whole house. With patience and affection, she became a fundamental figure, someone the boy could trust and feel safe with. The bond between them grew day by day, and Tom, who used to spend most of his time alone, now spent hours by Marta's side, soaking up the stories, affection, and attention she gave him. One afternoon, after a quiet day of games and activities, Tom took Marta by the arm while she was organizing some books on the library shelf. He looked at her with a twinkle in his eye that she rarely saw. He seemed to want to say something important, but hesitated. "Marta, can you play ball?" he asked shyly, holding a small soccer ball in his hands. She smiled, surprised by the question. "Yes, I do, Tom. I'm not a great player, but I think I can make a few passes." Tom's eyes lit up, and he smiled for the first time with carefree joy. "Will you play with me? Outside in the garden?" Marta laughed, excited by the idea. "Of course, Tom. Let's go." The two of them went out into the garden, where the long lawn looked like a perfect field to play on. Tom ran, excited, kicking the ball towards her. Marta, with a little difficulty due to her age, kicked the ball back, and they began a relaxed game, full of laughter. Tom ran free, laughing, and Marta was grateful to see the boy so happy. While they were playing, Carlton arrived and, on seeing the scene, stood still for a few moments, watching. He was visibly moved, seeing his son, who had previously shown little interest in the world around him, laughing and playing without reservation. "Marta, you have no idea how much this means to us," said Carlton, coming closer, his voice laden with emotion. He watched Tom with a look of deep gratitude. "I've never seen him so free, so happy." Marta, who was also touched by the scene, gave a soft smile. "Sometimes, Mr. Carlton, all a child needs is someone to accompany him in the little moments. He just wants to be heard, understood." Carlton nodded, reflecting. "You know, I've always been so worried about his safety, about what he needs to grow up, that maybe I've forgotten the basics. He just wants to be a child." Marta put her hand on Carlton's shoulder. "He's surrounded by love, Mr. Carlton, and what you do for him every day is what really matters. He feels it." Carlton looked at her with a smile that conveyed renewed confidence. "Thank you, Marta. Thank you for bringing that sparkle back into his life, and mine too." Suddenly, Tom ran up to them, interrupting their conversation. He was holding the ball and looking at his father with an expectant expression. "Dad, do you play with us?" Carlton was surprised. "Me? I don't know if I could keep up with you too." Marta laughed, encouraging him. "Come on, Mr. Carlton. You don't have to be a star. The important thing is to take part." And so the three of them began a lively game in the garden, full of laughter, playful moments, and even a little competition. Carlton, who couldn't remember the last time he had played ball, seemed to grow younger alongside his son and Marta. The afternoon unfolded in an atmosphere of pure happiness, something the house had not experienced for a long time. When they finally had enough, they sat down on the grass, panting and laughing. Marta looked at Tom, who was now leaning back on his father's lap, exhausted but with a smile on his lips. The scene warmed her heart. There, in the simplicity of that moment, she felt that her presence was making a real difference. "I wish every day was like this," said Tom, sleepily, as he held his father's hand. Carlton looked at him tenderly and replied, "They will be, my son. With Marta here, it seems that anything is possible." Marta, moved, held Tom's hand with affection. "I'll always be here, Tom, for whatever you need." At that moment, Marta realized that she wasn't just a maid in the Carlton household. She was part of the family. As the days went by, Marta felt more and more integrated into the Carlton family. Her routine with Tom was a mixture of fun times, learning, and discoveries. He now trusted her in a way that even Carlton never expected to see. However, one question remained in the air, something that Marta still didn't know she should bring up. The backpack incident and what had led to its disappearance that night in the restaurant. One afternoon, while organizing the books in the library, Marta was surprised by the entrance of Mr. Carlton, who looked worried and a little pensive. He closed the door behind him and watched her for a moment before approaching. "Marta, can I talk to you about something personal?" he asked with a serious tone. She nodded, already preparing to listen. "Of course, Mr. Carlton. Go ahead." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, as if pondering his words. "You remember the night you found the bag, don't you? That night had more consequences than I realized." Marta, a little surprised by the direction of the conversation, leaned forward, interested. "What exactly happened that night, Mr. Carlton? I know there was a mix-up, but I've never fully understood what led to the backpack being left at the dump." Carlton shook his head, as if reliving an uncomfortable moment. "That evening, I was having dinner with some important investors. It was a crucial opportunity for a major project that I had been trying to realize for years. However, in the middle of the meeting, one of the investors accused one of my partners of bad faith, of manipulating financial documents." Marta's eyes widened in surprise at the seriousness of the accusation. That's serious." "Yes," he continued with a sigh. "The situation quickly got out of hand. Suddenly, the conversation turned into a heated argument, and I found myself in the middle of a riot. In this chaos, my backpack was stolen. I only realized it was missing later, when the confusion had calmed down." Marta nodded, absorbing every word. "And then, that's when the thieves threw it away when they realized they were being followed, right?" "Exactly," he confirmed thoughtfully. "They realized that the restaurant's security guard was after them, so they discarded the backpack and ran off. I never imagined that it would end up in the dump, let alone that you would find it." Marta smiled slightly, trying to lighten the mood. "It was fate, Mr. Carlton. Perhaps all this happened so that we could meet." He looked at her with a soft smile and continued, "I believe that too. And since then, I've been thinking a lot about what happened that night. Seeing how you acted, your honesty, it made me realize that perhaps I had been negligent in blindly trusting the people I worked with." Marta nodded, feeling the gravity of the moment. "Sometimes, Mr. Carlton, the people closest to us can disappoint us, but that also teaches us to value those who really matter." Carlton watched her for a moment, with a look of deep admiration. "I've learned a lot from you, Marta. Since the day you set foot in this house, you've taught me the value of simple things, of genuine kindness." Marta smiled, a little touched. "Mr. Carlton, I think we all have something to learn from each other. You've given me a new chance, and for that I'm grateful." He nodded, visibly moved. "You've brought more than help to Tom. You've brought peace to our home and to me. But I want you to know that if you ever need anything at all, I'll be here." She remained silent, feeling the sincerity of his words. She knew that this was more than a simple thank you. It was a promise that, no matter what, she would have a place in that family. That night, as she went to bed, Marta reflected on everything she had heard. What had begun as a simple act of honesty had led her down an unexpected path, connecting her to a new family and giving her a purpose she had never imagined she would have. As the bond between Marta and the Carlton family grew stronger, she felt for the first time in many years truly part of something. Her presence transformed the atmosphere, bringing calm and genuine affection. Tom, who had previously lived in his own world, was now more open, and Carlton, increasingly grateful, saw Marta as irreplaceable. However, there was something still unresolved in Marta's mind, a feeling that her mission there went beyond caring for Tom. She felt that, somehow, she could do even more for the family. One quiet morning, Marta was enjoying her coffee in the kitchen when she heard hurried footsteps. It was Carlton, who seemed restless and distracted, talking on the phone in a tone she had never heard before. He was pacing back and forth, gesticulating as he tried to stay calm. "Yes, I understand, but this is unacceptable. We can't lose a contract of this size," he said, his voice laced with tension. Noticing Marta's presence, he quickly stopped the call and sighed, wiping his hand across his face. "I'm sorry, Marta. I didn't want you to see me like that." She gave him an understanding smile. "Don't worry, Mr. Carlton. I know you have many responsibilities. Is there anything I could do to help?" He hesitated, clearly surprised by the offer, but soon realized that this simple question already brought him some comfort. "Thank you, Marta. I'm dealing with business problems. It's a complicated situation, and sometimes I feel exhausted. I'm worried about the impact on Tom and on everything." Marta nodded, sensing the sincerity in his words. "Mr. Carlton, I may not understand business, but I've learned over the years that facing challenges calmly and honestly brings clarity. Perhaps it can help." He smiled, appreciating the simplicity of her wisdom. "You always know what to say, Marta. I've been trying to resolve this situation for weeks, but I seem to be stuck in a maze of contracts and disputes." She looked at him with affection and determination. "You don't have to carry everything yourself. Perhaps sharing the difficulties could help you find a new solution. And if you ever need to vent, I'm here to listen." Carlton reflected for a moment and, realizing that Marta was someone he could really trust, decided to open up a little more. "Actually, I'm dealing with an internal dispute in the company. Since that night in the restaurant, I've realized that my partner, well, he may not be the person of integrity I thought. I'm trying to undo the contract with him, but there are a lot of legal implications." Marta, who was listening attentively, replied, "Perhaps what happened with the bag that night was a warning to you. Sometimes God sends us signs when we need to reevaluate those around us." He looked at her with admiration. "You know, Marta, maybe you're right. I would never have suspected anything if that mess hadn't happened. Your honesty, your gesture, is what made me open my eyes." At that moment, Tom came into the kitchen, holding the stuffed bunny and rubbing his eyes, still sleepy. When he saw Marta and his father talking, he approached her and tugged at the hem of her blouse. "Marta, are you going to play with me today?" he asked with an expectant expression. She smiled and bent down to meet him. "Of course, Tom. I'm going to spend the whole day with you." Carlton watched the scene and smiled, his gaze softening. It was as if seeing the bond between Marta and her son reminded him of what really mattered. Feeling inspired by her presence, he bent down beside his son and took his hand. "Son, did you know that Marta is a very special person? She's helping us in ways you can't even imagine." Tom smiled, hugging Marta without fully understanding, but feeling safe and loved. Marta returned the hug, feeling the warmth of that moment, and realizing that, even though she didn't understand the details of Carlton's business, per rule there had a greater purpose. After that day, Carlton began to share short updates about his challenges at work. Although he didn't expect Marta to be able to solve the problems, he felt that talking to her gave him the strength to move forward. Marta, for her part, listened attentively and always offered a word of encouragement or a reminder that, at the end of the day, integrity was worth more than any business deal. One evening, when everyone had retired, Carlton knocked softly on Marta's bedroom door. She opened it, a little surprised, and saw him with an expression of relief mixed with exhaustion. "Marta, I did it," he said, his voice laced with emotion. "Today I finalized the process of detaching myself from my partner. It was a difficult decision, but a necessary one. And, frankly, I owe part of that decision to you." She smiled, touched by his words. "I'm glad to hear that you found the right path. Honesty always lights the way, even when it seems dark." Carlton nodded and looked at her gratefully. "You've changed my life and that of my son. Tom is happier than ever, and I learned what really matters." Before leaving, he held Marta's hand and said, "You are much more than an employee in this house. You're a friend, a part of our family, and we'll never be able to repay you for everything you've done for us." Marta, her eyes watering, replied, "I only followed what my heart told me, Mr. Carlton. Sometimes fate takes us to places we never imagined, but which are exactly where we should be." At that moment, they both knew that whatever challenges came their way, they were prepared to face them together. Honesty and friendship had created an unbreakable bond in that family, and Marta felt more than ever that she was in the right place. With Carlton's confidence strengthened and the family finally at peace, Marta began to notice something that touched her deeply: how much safer and more confident Tom felt by her side. He was becoming more open and beginning to explore the world around him with renewed curiosity. However, despite the obvious progress, Marta knew that Tom's journey was still a long one, especially with the challenges he faced as an autistic child. One quiet morning, while the two of them were playing in the garden, Tom stopped and looked at her with a curious gaze. "Marta, why are you always here with me?" The unexpected question surprised her, but she smiled and answered tenderly, "Because I love you, Tom, and also because I want you to know that you can always count on me." Tom seemed to think for a moment, still holding his inseparable stuffed bunny. Sometimes other people don't understand what I say, but you do. Marta felt a twinge of emotion when she heard this. It's because I listen with my heart, my dear. Sometimes you don't have to say much to understand what the other person is feeling. He nodded and smiled shyly, as if he had received confirmation of something important. At that moment, Marta had an idea. She decided that she would help Tom communicate even better with the people around him, especially with his father, who, despite loving his son deeply, still struggled to understand the nuances of his personality. In the late afternoon, when Carlton arrived home, Marta called him in for a chat. "Mr. Carlton, I've been thinking about how we can help Tom express his feelings more easily." He watched her with interest, curious about what she had in mind. "What do you suggest, Marta? Anything that might help him would be welcome." Marta smiled, feeling her excitement grow. "I thought of something simple. What if you and he had a special routine together? Something that was just the two of you? It could be a game, an activity, or even a short chat at the end of the day." Carlton was thoughtful, reflecting on her suggestion. That sounds powerful. I've always wanted to understand Tom's world better, but sometimes I feel there's a barrier. I believe that these little routines help to create a bridge, Mr. Carlton, Marta continued. For him, it will be a way of hoping and trusting that you will have that moment together. And for you, it will be a chance to get to know him even better. Carlton smiled, looking excited by the idea. "I like that, Marta, and I think I know what we can do. When I was little, my father and I used to go for walks in the park every evening. Maybe Tom would like something like that." Marta nodded, pleased with Carlton's enthusiasm. "I'm sure he'll love it. And most importantly, these moments will become precious memories, both for him and for you." That evening, Carlton spoke to Tom about their plan to have a special moment of their own. At first, Tom was a little shy, but when he saw his father's excitement, he started to get excited about the idea of a walk together. They decided to go for their first walk the following evening, and Marta offered to help Tom get ready. When the time came, Tom was ready and waiting eagerly. He was holding his bunny, but when he saw his father ready for the hike, he put the toy aside, trusting that he could face the experience without it. "Are you ready, champ?" asked Carlton, holding out his hand. Tom nodded and took his father's hand. Marta watched them go, feeling her heart warm at the sight of the bond between them growing stronger. She knew that although she was there to support Tom, it was also her mission to bring him even closer to Carlton. The walk became a routine. Every evening, father and son would go out together, exploring the small streets in the park near the mansion. During these moments, Tom would talk about what he was feeling, sometimes mentioning things that made him anxious, other times commenting on what he had learned from Marta. Carlton, for his part, listened attentively, amazed at the way his son was beginning to open up, speaking in a way he had never witnessed before. On one of their walks, Tom suddenly stopped and looked at his father. "Dad, do you think Marta will stay with us forever?" The question took Carlton by surprise, but he answered sincerely, "I hope so, son. She's brought something very special into our lives." Tom smiled and held his father's hand tighter. "I want her to stay too. She's my friend." That evening, on his way home, Carlton went into the kitchen where Marta was finishing the dishes. He approached her and watched her for a moment without saying anything until she noticed him. "Mr. Carlton, are you all right?" she asked, noticing the emotional look on his face. "Yes, Marta. In fact, more than fine. I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done for us. Today, Tom told me that he hopes you'll stay forever." His voice faltered slightly, revealing the emotion he was trying to control. Marta, touched, smiled, feeling the warmth of those words. "I hope to stay too, Mr. Carlton. You have become my family, and that's something I never imagined I'd find again." He nodded, touched. "You've brought more than help to this house. You've brought love, kindness, and hope. And I realize now that, without knowing it, you have become the heart of this family." Those words stayed with Marta that night. As she gazed out of her bedroom window, watching the soft lights of the garden, she reflected on how life had led her down unlikely paths. From the simplicity and humility of her routine as a recycler at the dump to this home, where she was loved and valued. She knew that fate, in its silent wisdom, had placed her exactly where she needed to be. And with the confidence that she was living her mission, Marta fell asleep in peace, certain that she would continue to illuminate Tom and Carlton's lives with the love that only a true family could share. A few weeks after Tom and Carlton began their nightly walks, Marta noticed an even greater transformation in the boy. He was more secure, smiled more, and, above all, seemed more confident when interacting with others. What had previously been a discreet routine of care and support had become a deep bond of friendship and trust between them. However, another change was to come, and Marta still didn't know how much it would impact her life. One sunny afternoon, while preparing lunch in the kitchen, Marta was surprised by the entrance of Carlton, who was carrying an envelope and an intriguing smile on his face. He stopped next to her and held out the envelope. "Marta, I'd like you to take a look at this," he said, handing her the envelope. She dried her hands on her apron, a little surprised, and carefully opened the envelope. As she took out the contents, she saw a series of printed papers, but what caught her eye was the title in large letters, Certificate of Ownership. "Mr. Carlton, what is that?" she asked, still not understanding. "Marta, you're part of our family now. I always knew I wanted to do something to repay you for the impact you've had on Tom's life, and mine too. So I bought you a house in a safe, quiet neighborhood where you can live in comfort." Marta was silent, her eyes watering with emotion. "Mr. Carlton, I don't know what to say." Carlton placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I know this is a lot, but it's something I really want to do. It's a gift, Marta, for all the kindness and honesty you've given us. You deserve a home, a place of your own, where you can live in dignity and safety." She looked at him, still incredulous. "But what about Tom? I don't want to leave him." Carlton smiled and shook his head. "You'll never have to leave Tom. He's so attached to you that it would be impossible to separate you. What I want is for you to have a place to call your own, and whenever you want, you can come back here to stay with us." Tom, who had quietly entered the kitchen during the conversation, approached and took Marta's hand. He looked at her with a serious expression, which quickly turned into a smile. "Marta, is this house for you? Is it a present?" he asked with curious eyes. Marta smiled at the boy, bending down so that she was at his height. "Yes, Tom, your father has given me a house so that I can live safely, but that doesn't mean I'm leaving you. I'll always be around." Tom seemed satisfied with her answer and gave her a tight hug. "I'm glad, Marta. You deserve a beautiful home." She hugged him back with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, my dear. This is the best present I could ever receive, because it means I have you as my family." Over the next few days, Carlton took Marta to see their new home. It was a modest but cozy home, with a small garden and a balcony that allowed them to watch the sunset. Marta was thrilled to see every detail of the house, realizing that Carlton had thought of every corner with care. It was as if he had designed the home especially for her, taking into account everything she liked and what would make her happy. As they walked through the house, Carlton explained, "I want you to know that no matter where you are, you can always count on us. And if you need anything, just call." Marta looked around, still absorbing every detail. "This house is more than I ever dreamed of, Mr. Carlton. It's a real home." He smiled, pleased. "It's the least we can do for someone who has transformed our lives. I hope you find peace and happiness here." When the move was complete, Marta realized that, despite her new home and the independence she now possessed, nothing would take her away from the Carlton family. Tom continued to visit her frequently, and she went to the mansion whenever he asked. For him, Marta was much more than a carer. She was a friend, someone who understood him like few others. On one of Tom's visits, he ran into Marta's garden, where she was tending some flowers. He approached with a stuffed bunny in hand and an enthusiastic smile. "Marta, look, I want Max to have a special place here in your house," he said, handing her the bunny. She looked at him, surprised and thrilled. "Are you sure, Tom? Max is your best friend." He nodded with a confident smile. "Yes, but now he can be friends with both of us. That way, when I'm not here, he can keep you company." Marta held the bunny lovingly, feeling the weight of Tom's gesture. "Thank you, darling. I'll take very good care of Max, and he'll always have a special place here." Over the next few days, Marta arranged a little corner in her room for the bunny, leaving him always in sight as a constant reminder of Tom's affection. And so, between comings and goings, she found a perfect balance between her new home and her presence in the Carlton family's life. Sitting on her balcony at dusk, Marta reflected on everything she had achieved. Fate had taken her down unimaginable paths, from the dump where she had found her backpack to forging deep bonds with people who were now her family. And, more than ever, she knew that honesty and kindness had paved the way for the peace and happiness that now filled her life. Over time, Marta settled completely into her new home, but the bond with the Carlton family remained stronger than ever. She now divided herself between the comfort of the home Carlton had provided her and regular visits to the mansion, where she remained a constant presence for Tom. Although their routine was quiet and satisfying, an unexpected visit was about to bring a new wave of emotions to everyone. One sunny morning, while Marta was tidying up her garden, she heard the sound of a car parking. Turning around, she saw Carlton getting out of the car with an expression of surprise and joy. He wasn't alone. Next to him was a young woman with bright eyes and light hair, who approached Marta with a kind smile. "Marta, I'd like you to meet my sister, Alice," said Carlton, extending his hand towards the young woman. "She was traveling when everything happened and didn't have the opportunity to meet you in person." Marta, surprised and a little emotional, held out her hand to Alice. "Nice to meet you, dear. I've heard a lot about you." Alice smiled and shook Marta's hand affectionately. "The pleasure is all mine, Marta. My brother and Tom talk about you so much that it feels like I've known you forever. I can only thank you for what you've done for them." Marta smiled shyly. "I just did what my heart told me to. I was happy to help." Carlton watched the scene with a look of gratitude. "Alice has always been there for me, but recently I've had to learn to appreciate even more the people who really care. When I told her everything you'd done for us, she was thrilled." Alice nodded, still holding Marta's hand. "Yes, and I needed to come in person to thank you. My brother and Tom have changed a lot since you came into their lives. It's clear how much peace you've brought to this house." Marta felt touched by Alice's words and smiled. "I'm glad to hear that. To see Tom happy, growing up and feeling safe, that means everything to me." Carlton, sensing the emotion in the air, changed the subject with an excited smile. "Actually, Alice had an idea that I thought was wonderful, Marta. She wants to pay tribute to you." Marta's eyes widened in surprise. "Tribute? Oh, but there's no need for that. I just did what I thought was right." Alice put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We know that, Marta, but we want you to feel how important you are to our family. I was thinking of organizing a small dinner, something intimate, just to express our gratitude for everything you've done. It will be right here, at your house." Marta was speechless for a few moments, trying to absorb the idea. "A dinner here? My God, I never imagined anything like this, but I'm very honored." Carlton nodded, visibly pleased. "You deserve it, Marta. It will be a simple celebration, but full of meaning. We want you to know that. For us, you're part of the family." Marta smiled, trying to hold back the tears. "It's a great honor, Mr. Carlton, Alice. I accept the invitation with all my heart." Over the next few days, Alice and Carlton took care of the preparations. Tom, excited by the idea, helped decorate Marta's garden with small lights and flowers. Every detail was thought of with care, and Marta, although humble, accepted the tribute with gratitude, feeling increasingly welcomed and valued. On the evening of the dinner, Marta put on her simplest dress, but one she liked very much, and carefully fixed her hair. When she went out in the garden, she was thrilled to see the lights on, the table set with flowers and the atmosphere so welcoming. It was a real scene of affection and respect. Carlton smiled when he saw her. "Marta, you look beautiful. It's an honor to celebrate this moment with you." Alice walked over and handed him a small bouquet of flowers. "These are for you, Marta, a way of saying thank you for everything you mean to us." Marta accepted the flowers, touched. "Thank you, you don't know how much this means to me." Dinner went lightly and happily, with laughter and stories. Tom, who was sitting next to Marta, animatedly told her about his adventures in the garden, his walks with his father, and how much he loved the moments they spent together. With every word, Marta felt her heart warm, seeing how much that boy had grown emotionally since she had met him. At the end of the meal, Carlton asked for the floor, and everyone turned to him. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, especially you, Marta. You have brought something invaluable into our lives. Today, we are a closer and happier family thanks to your presence." Alice added, her eyes shining with emotion. "Marta, you're a living proof that kindness changes the world, and we want you to know that you will always be part of our family, no matter what happens." Marta, overcome with emotion, wiped away a tear that was running down her cheek. I never imagined that life would bring me here. Everything I've done from the heart. And knowing that you consider me family is the greatest reward I could ever receive." At the end of the evening, as everyone was saying goodbye, Tom held Marta's hand and looked at her with a special smile. "Marta, you're my best friend, and I never want you to leave." She bent down to hug him, feeling that child's genuine love. "I'm never going anywhere, Tom. I'll always be here for you." Carlton and Alice watched the scene with emotional smiles, aware that Marta was a priceless gift in their lives. And so, on that special night, Marta was sure that she had found a permanent home, a place where her heart would always be at peace. As the months went by, Marta's life took on a peaceful routine filled with meaning. She divided her time between her home in the Carlton mansion, and every day she felt more connected to the family that had welcomed her so warmly. Tom continued to grow, increasingly confident and cheerful, and Carlton seemed lighter, enjoying life in a way he hadn't been able to before. But despite the peace she felt, Marta noticed that there was something in Carlton's eyes, a restlessness that he tried to hide. One afternoon, while Marta was preparing lunch for Tom in the mansion's kitchen, Carlton walked in, his expression visibly worried. He seemed to hesitate, as if searching for the right words. "Marta, I need to talk to you about something important," he said with a serious tone. She stopped what she was doing and approached him, ready to listen. "Of course, Mr. Carlton. What's wrong?" He sighed, running his hand through his hair. "It's about the future, Marta. I've been thinking a lot about Tom and what would be best for him, for us as a family, and in a way that involves you." Marta frowned, sensing the seriousness of his words. "I'm here for whatever you need, Mr. Carlton. You know I'll do everything in my power to help you and Tom." He nodded, looking relieved to hear that. "I know, Marta, and that's exactly why I wanted to talk. Tom has changed with you. You brought him a kind of warmth and security that I've never been able to give him on my own. But I've been thinking about how to make sure he stays that way, even when I can't be here anymore." Marta felt a squeeze in her heart when she heard that. "Mr. Carlton, what do you mean?" He looked at her sincerely. "Marta, you're more than a friend to me. You're someone I trust completely, and I'd like to formalize that. I'm planning to make you Tom's legal guardian in case anything happens to me. I know it's a big ask, but I want to make sure he's with someone who loves and understands him, someone who will always put his well-being first." Marta felt tears come to her eyes. She had never imagined that Carlton would trust her to this extent, that he would consider her worthy of such an immense responsibility. "Mr. Carlton, this is a gift, an honor, but also a great responsibility." He nodded, with a determined look on his face. "I know it is, Marta, but I don't trust anyone else with it. It's not just the affection you have for him, but also the patience, the understanding. Tom needs someone who really knows him, someone who will be by his side at all times." Marta took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that decision. "I accept, Mr. Carlton. I will take care of Tom as if he were my own son, with all the love and dedication he deserves." Carlton sighed, clearly relieved. "Thank you, Marta. That gives me peace. I know Tom will be safe with you. And of course, I hope this will never be necessary, but knowing that he has you as his guardian brings me immense relief." The conversation was interrupted when Tom entered the kitchen, holding a book of drawings that he wanted to show Marta. He pulled her by the hand, enthusiastically, and the two of them sat down to admire his creations. Carlton watched the scene, smiling with a mixture of pride and reassurance. He knew that, whatever the future held, Tom would be supported and protected. A few days later, Carlton and Marta formalized their decision. He took her to the family lawyer's office, where they signed the documents that officially made her Tom's guardian in case of need. Although it was a serious moment, Carlton and Marta maintained a sense of serenity, as if they were only reinforcing a bond that already existed naturally between them. As they left the office, Carlton looked at Marta, who seemed a little pensive. "I know this is a big responsibility." Marta smiled, taking his hand. "It's all right, Mr. Carlton. I feel this is my mission. Tom has brought a new purpose to my life, and being able to take care of him, under any circumstances, is something I would do with all my heart." He nodded, grateful for those words. "Thank you, Marta. Knowing that he has you gives me more strength to face whatever comes." That night, as she watched Tom fall asleep next to his bunny, Marta reflected on everything that moment meant. She, who had previously believed that her life was destined to be simple and lonely, now had a clear purpose, a real family. She knew the responsibility was enormous, but she was ready to face any challenge that came her way. Marta said goodbye to Carlton and returned to her home. But the feeling of belonging and love she carried with her was strong and constant. No matter what the future held, she was where she was supposed to be, next to the people she loved, ready to be Tom's safe haven whenever he needed it. Sometime after the conversation with Carlton and the formalization of her responsibility as Tom's guardian, Marta noticed that the boy seemed more attentive and curious about the world around him. His confidence was flourishing, and he was becoming more sociable every day. Carlton, observing his son's progress, suggested that they take advantage of this new phase and go on a family trip, something that could enrich Tom's experiences even more. One afternoon, Carlton gathered Marta and Tom in the living room and excitedly told him the news. "Tom, Marta, I was thinking, what do you think about taking a trip? Something special, to spend more time together away from here." Tom looked at his father, surprised and excited. "A trip? Where to, Dad?" Carlton smiled and looked at Marta, who was already showing a sparkle in her eyes. "Well, I thought of something simple but different from what we're used to. How about we go to a cabin in the mountains? We can spend a few days in contact with nature, away from everything." Marta smiled, sensing Tom's excitement. "I think it's a wonderful idea, Mr. Carlton. Tom will love it, and I think it will be good for all of us." Tom clapped his hands, excited. "Yes, I want to see the mountains, Marta. I want to play in the snow." Carlton smiled, pleased with their reaction. "Good. I'll organize everything, and we'll leave at the weekend." In the days leading up to the trip, Marta helped Tom pack his suitcase, choosing warm clothes and some of his favorite toys. The boy was excited, asking all the time what the cabin would be like and what they would be doing in the mountains. Marta calmed him down with a smile and a promise. "It's going to be an adventure, darling. You'll love it." Finally, on the day of the trip, they all set off together, with Carlton driving and Tom and Marta sharing stories and laughs in the back seat. The winding road and mountain scenery were enchanting, and with every turn, Tom seemed more fascinated, pointing to the tall trees and snow-capped peaks in the distance. When they arrived at the cabin, they were greeted by the peaceful silence of nature. It was a cozy place, with a breathtaking view of the mountains and a gently flowing river beside it. Marta immediately felt at peace, as if this environment was the perfect complement to the harmony she had found with the Carlton family. "Look at this," said Carlton, as he opened the cabin door. "This will be our refuge for the next few days. I hope you like it." Tom ran off to explore the bedrooms and living room, enchanted by everything around him. Marta looked at Carlton, smiling. "Mr. Carlton, this is wonderful. I think it will be an unforgettable experience for all of us." He nodded, pleased. "That was a point, Marta. Sometimes we need to get away from it all to really reconnect with who we are." Over the next few days, the routine in the hut was marked by simple but meaningful moments. In the morning, they walked the surrounding trails, exploring the forest and admiring nature. Tom, with the typical curiosity of a child, asked questions about the plants, animals, and everything he saw. Marta patiently answered each question, and, when she didn't know the answer, made up amusing stories to entertain the boy. One afternoon, while they were walking by the river, Tom stopped and looked at Marta, holding her hand tightly. "Marta, do you think we can live here forever?" She smiled and bent down to his height. My dear, this is a beautiful place, but our home is where we have everything and everyone we love. And you know, home is where you have your room, your toys, and our garden." He seemed to think for a moment and then smiled. "Yes, but I like it here too." Carlton, who was watching the conversation, came over and put his hand on Tom's shoulder. "We can come back whenever we want, son. This will be our special refuge." In the evenings, they sat around the fireplace in the cabin, sharing stories and laughter. Marta made hot chocolate, and Tom, with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, listened attentively to every story she told about her childhood. The simplicity of that moment made Marta feel grateful. She looked at Carlton and Tom and felt that she would need nothing more in life than the peace and connection she had found with them. On one of those nights, after Tom had fallen asleep, Carlton and Marta stood by the fire in silence. It was a comfortable silence, as if they each understood what the other was feeling without needing words. After a while, Carlton spoke softly. "Marta, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for us. This trip has made me realize even more how essential you are to our family." She looked at him, touched by his words. "Mr. Carlton, being here with you is more than I could ever ask for. I feel like I found my place with you. Taking care of Tom and watching him grow up is a gift that life has given me." He nodded with a deep look of gratitude. "I hope you never feel like you have to leave. This family is yours too." Marta smiled, touched. "I have no intention of going anywhere. I'm exactly where I should be." The next morning, before they left, Tom ran down to the river and picked up a small stone that he thought was special, handing it to Marta. "For you, Marta, to remember this trip." She accepted the stone with affection, holding it like a real treasure. "Thank you, Tom. This will be my favorite souvenir." The trip was over, but the days spent in the mountains left a deep mark on all of them. Carlton, Marta, and Tom returned home more united than ever, carrying the memories of simple but meaningful moments. In that refuge, each of them found a new reason to love and value even more the family they had built together. A few months after the trip to the mountains, the Carlton family's routine continued in harmony. Tom continued to make progress, and Marta remained a constant and essential presence, bringing calm and balance to the boy. Carlton, for his part, noticed how his son became more secure and confident with each new day. However, a new opportunity would arise and bring about a significant change for everyone. One afternoon, Carlton walked into the kitchen, where Marta was preparing Tom's lunch, and with a smile mixed with a glow of expectation, caught her eye. "Marta, I have some news to share with you," he began, seeming to choose his words carefully. Marta looked at him, curious. "Of course, Mr. Carlton. What happened?" He leaned closer and, with a satisfied smile, explained, "I've been offered a position in another country. It's a big project that I've always dreamed of working on. However, it involves a temporary move to Europe. At first, I thought I'd turn it down, but then I realized that maybe this could be a valuable experience for Tom and for us as a family." She felt a mixture of surprise and excitement when she heard that. "Europe? Mr. Carlton, that's a great opportunity. But is Tom prepared for such a change?" Carlton nodded, still looking thoughtful. "Yes, that's my biggest concern. I've been thinking a lot about how he would adapt. And I know that, without you by our side, this transition would be difficult. So I'd like to extend an invitation. Marta, I'd like you to come with us. Your presence is essential for Tom to feel safe during this change." She widened her eyes in surprise at the invitation. "Mr. Carlton, this is an honor, but do you really believe that my presence is necessary for Tom to adapt well?" He nodded firmly. "Absolutely. You are the foundation of the progress he has made. He trusts you completely, and so do I. I know that your presence would make this transition smoother for him." Marta, moved, took a deep breath. "If you believe is best for Tom, then I accept. I can't imagine leaving him at this point." Carlton smiled, relieved. "Thank you, Marta. It means a lot to us. I know the move will be a big adventure, but with you by our side, I feel we can face any challenge." In the days leading up to the trip, Marta helped Tom prepare, explaining about the new house, the new country, and what a special experience it would be. The boy showed curiosity, but also a hint of apprehension. She could see that, although he was excited, he was afraid of the unknown. One evening, shortly before their departure, Tom approached her, holding his stuffed bunny. "Marta, you're going to stay with me, even in another country, right?" She bent down to his height and hugged him affectionately. "Of course, my darling. Wherever you go, I'll be by your side. Let's discover this new place together, and I'll be with you every step of the way." He smiled, visibly relieved. "I'm go, Marta, because I don't know what it's going to be like, but if you're there, I won't be afraid." With everything ready, the family set off for Europe. The journey was long, but Tom stayed by Marta's side the whole time, chatting and asking questions about what he would see when he arrived. When they landed, they were greeted by a completely new landscape, an old city full of historic buildings and cobbled streets. Tom looked around, fascinated and a little overwhelmed, but Marta reassured him, holding his hand and explaining every detail. The new house was a mixture of old and new, with a spectacular view of the city. Tom, still a little shy of his surroundings, explored every corner, always calling Marta over to see his discoveries. Carlton watched their interaction with gratitude, knowing that the decision had been the best one for everyone. Over the next few weeks, Marta helped Tom adapt to his new routine. They walked the city streets together, exploring the squares, visiting the markets, and getting to know the local culture. Every experience was a learning opportunity, and Marta made sure to make every discovery special for him. Little by little, Tom felt more secure, until he began to show a natural curiosity and enthusiasm for his new life. One afternoon, while they were in a nearby park, Tom sat down on a bench next to Marta and looked at her with a sincere smile. "Marta, I think I like it here. You've taught me that I can feel at home anywhere if I have the ones I love close to me." She hugged him, touched by the boy's words. "That's true, darling. Home is where you are, with the people you love." Later that day, Carlton, who had been watching the interaction between the two from afar, approached Marta with a smile. "I see that Tom is adapting better than we imagined. And that's thanks to you, Marta. You've turned something that could have been frightening for him into an exciting adventure." Marta smiled, pleased with Tom's progress. "He's a strong child, Mr. Carlton. He just needed someone to show him the way." Carlton nodded in agreement. "And that's why you're irreplaceable for us. I see how much he trusts you, and that gives me peace of mind, knowing that we're all here together. That's all I could ask for." At that moment, Marta felt the depth of her connection with that family. She had accepted the move out of love for them, and now she saw how much her gesture meant, not only to Tom, but also to Carlton, who found her an invaluable support. She knew that wherever they went, they would remain united, like a real family, facing every challenge together and discovering the world side by side. And so, in that new country, between old streets and new experiences, Marta once again found the true meaning of home, a place where love and trust transform any environment into a safe haven, where the heart is always at peace. The time in Europe brought a host of new experiences and even deeper bonds for Marta, Tom, and Carlton. They adapted to the culture, learned to appreciate the details of that ancient city, and, together, made this new home a welcoming refuge. As the months passed, Marta felt that her journey with them had taken her to a place of love and belonging that she had never imagined. However, she knew that every phase had its end, and their stay there was nearing its conclusion. One quiet evening, while Marta was preparing dinner, Carlton approached the kitchen with a soft expression, but one charged with emotion. He paused for a moment, watching her, as if trying to choose the right words for what he needed to say. "Marta," he began, his voice calm but full of meaning, "we have to talk about something important." She stopped what she was doing and turned to him, noticing the seriousness in his gaze. "Of course, Mr. Carlton. What happened?" Carlton took a deep breath and, with a small smile, continued. "The company wants me to come back to the United States for a new project, something big and challenging. The time we spent here has been wonderful, but it's time to go home." Marta absorbed the news with a slight sigh. Europe had become a home for them, a place where they all found peace and new memories. But she knew that a return to the United States was inevitable. "I understand, Mr. Carlton. You and Tom have roots there, and I know he'll want to go back to his place," replied Marta with an understanding smile. Carlton nodded, but seemed to hesitate, as if there was something else he wanted to say. "I'd like you to stay with us, Marta. I know this is a new phase, and maybe I'm asking too much, but you're part of our family. I can't imagine our life without you." Marta felt a lump of emotion in her throat. The affection between her and the Carlton family was real, deep, and she knew that her life wouldn't be the same without them either. With a determined look, she replied, "Mr. Carlton, wherever you are, I will be too. Tom is like a son to me, and you will always have my support." Carlton smiled, visibly relieved. "Thank you, Marta. You have no idea how much this means to us." A few days later, they began organizing the move back. Tom, although reluctant to leave the environment he had learned to love, was ready to return to his real home. In one of their conversations, he approached Marta, holding the stuffed bunny, and said in a sincere tone, "Marta, when we get back, you're still going to be my best friend, aren't you?" She bent down to look him in the eye and replied tenderly, "Always, my darling. No matter where we are, you will always be very important to me." His heart warmed by her answer. Tom smiled with relief. For him, the friendship and love that Marta offered was his anchor, something that wouldn't change, no matter where they were. When they returned to the United States, life in the mansion resumed its rhythm, but something was different. The experience in Europe had transformed them all, leaving them more united and with a renewed perspective on the value of family. Carlton reorganized his routine to spend more time with Tom, and Marta continued to offer the same unconditional support, guiding the boy and being the pillar she had always been for the family. One evening, as they sat down at dinner together, Carlton made a toast. He raised his glass and looked at Marta with gratitude. "I want to thank you that we are lucky enough to have someone as special as you, Marta. This house is what it is because of you." Tom, standing next to her, raised his glass with an excited smile and said, "To the best Marta in the world." They laughed, and Marta emotionally raised her glass. Feeling more than a caregiver, she truly felt part of that family. She knew that, whatever the future held, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. With the return to the United States, the routine stabilized and the bond between Marta and the Carlton family stronger than ever. Carlton began to reflect on the future. He knew that, although Marta's presence was constant and essential, she couldn't just be a caregiver forever. Tom was already a school-age boy, and Carlton wanted to ensure that he grew up in an environment where Marta also had her personal fulfillment, something that transcended everyday responsibilities. One afternoon, while Tom was at school, Carlton approached Marta in the kitchen, where she was preparing dinner. He watched every detail of what she was doing, as if he were seeing more than the simple act of preparing a meal. "Marta," he said after a moment's silence, "I've been thinking a lot about the future, about what this means for you and the role you play in our family." She stopped and looked at him, puzzled. "Mr. Carlton, what do you mean? Is everything all right?" He smiled, trying to convey the importance of what he was about to say. "Yes, everything is fine, but I feel the time has come for us to do something special for you. I'd like to help you realize your own dreams and make sure you also have what you've always offered us. A secure future, something that's all yours." Marta remained silent in surprise. Although her heart was completely devoted to Tom's well-being and the Carlton household, those words caused her to reflect on her own desires and goals. "Mr. Carlton, I never imagined anything beyond what I already have here. Being by Tom's side and helping him grow is already a great achievement for me," Marta replied, trying to contain her emotion. He nodded, recognizing the sincerity in her words. "I know, Marta, but I want you to think about something beyond today. I'm thinking of setting up a fund for you, something that will guarantee your security in the future. I'd also like to help you do something you've always wanted to do, whether it's a personal project, a course, or even starting your own business." Marta was visibly touched, and for a moment, ideas began to dance in her mind. At some point in her life, before the difficulties and responsibilities, she had dreamed of opening a small bakery where she could create and serve homemade sweets and breads. However, she had always considered this dream too distant. "Actually, Mr. Carlton," she said hesitantly, "I've always had a dream, but it was something I considered impossible. When I was young, I wanted to have a small bakery, something simple where I could serve people with love and care." Carlton smiled, delighted with the idea. "Marta, that's perfect. And why should it be impossible? Let's make it happen. We can start slowly, set up something small, and see how it all unfolds. It will be your space, where you can share your talent and at the same time, have your personal fulfillment." She was moved to tears. "I can't thank you enough, Mr. Carlton. I never imagined that my dreams could really come true. This is more than I could ever ask for." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "No need to thank me, Marta. You're part of our family, and it's our wish to see you happy and fulfilled, just as you've always done for us." Over the next few months, Carlton and Marta worked together to make her dream come true. They found a small space in town, near Tom's school, and Marta began decorating the bakery with personal touches, from the cozy tables to the details on the shelves where she displayed her creations. The first batch of bread and cakes was a success, and with Carlton's support and Tom's enthusiasm, who helped her choose the flavors, the bakery soon became a special place for the community. Marta, now with a new purpose, lived life with the satisfaction of knowing that she had found her place alongside the Carlton family and at the same time, achieved something of her own. Carlton, seeing the joy in her eyes, was happy to have contributed to her also having the secure future he had always provided for them. And so, among the sweets, the aroma of coffee and the smiles of friends and customers, Marta found a new reason to smile, knowing that her kindness and dedication had finally found a just and lasting reward. If you enjoyed this video, comment your age and tell us where in the world you're watching from. And if you'd like to see more content like this, we prepared the next video just for you. Click here to watch.